Overview. The Kill Chain 2020 is a wake-up call about the need for reform in the U.S. military. Christian Brose, who was a senior advisor to Senator John McCain, explains how emerging technologies are threatening both the dominance and security of the United States. China has been studying U.S. warfare for decades, and it has advanced beyond what Americans thought was possible. The U.S. government needs to start making different decisions. The United States has been losing against the future for a while now, and a new high-tech defense strategy is necessary. An unknown danger. Christian Brose was the late John McCain's principal advisor, and he became his staff director when McCain chaired the Senate Armed Services Committee. This gave them both a major role in the U.S. defense program and its budget. Something McCain was aware of, but other senators weren't, was the growing danger of the Chinese Communist Party. Only a few people in government understood how likely it was that the U.S. would lose a war against China. In that scenario, a lot of Americans would die, and U.S. ships, bases, and aircraft would be destroyed in a matter of days. All this could happen because China was closely studying the U.S. military in the past few decades. Although the annual military budget was around $700 billion, the U.S. was spending it wrong. Too much money went for expensive equipment, and too little was invested in the tool that wins wars, the kill chain. A kill chain has 3 steps: understanding the situation, making the right decisions, and taking action. This sequence is essential to any military action, and completing it closes the kill chain. The truth is, the U.S. military is not that good at closing kill chains, and the problem has been made worse by focusing on the war in the Middle East rather than future threats. The U.S. does not realize how huge China's military progress is, and real change is needed. Yoda's Forgotten Revolution. After the Cold War, Andrew Marshall, nicknamed Yoda, was the director of the Office of Net Assessment of the Defense Department. He started focusing his work on the military future of the United States. His take on the war in Iraq was that it was not as successful as it seemed. The U.S. presented an illusion of dominance because the military had been going to war on its own terms against countries that couldn't fight back. This was also the case in the war in the Balkans. Marshall thought that the future of warfare would be similar to what the Soviets predicted. They expected a military technical revolution, where surveillance technologies and better communication would make for the most effective kill chain. Marshall also expected that China was on its way to achieving this technological superiority. This turned out to be true. But after 9/11, President George W. Bush and Donald Rumsfeld, his Secretary of Defense, called for an extreme focus on fighting terrorism. There was no longer any time to think of China's emerging threat, and since past military strategies were working, there was no apparent need for change. With the presidency of Barack Obama, the belief that the United States was militarily dominant was still strong. Obama wanted to end the wars that Bush had started and focus on Asia, yet he ended up cutting the military budget and kept fighting wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and Yemen. Once again, China's threat was completely forgotten. Russian and Chinese dominance. On February 27, 2014, armed Russian military operatives started taking over multiple strategic locations in Crimea, Ukraine. This move took the U.S. government by surprise. After a couple days, Russian forces had complete control over Crimea, and it officially became Russian territory. The way the Russians did this was militarily ideal. They could quickly close kill chains. They were equipped with high-tech weapons, communication jammers, and long-range precision artillery. Ukrainian forces were obliterated before they could even try to fight back. It was clear that in a war against Russia, both current U.S. and NATO forces would not stand a chance either. This was the wake-up call they needed, and a reminder that Russia is not the only strong enemy. The military advances in China for the past couple decades were far beyond Russia's. This became clear to the United States after China started building man-made islands and military bases in the disputed area of the South China Sea. China had developed the same kinds of high-tech weapons Marshall had talked about. China first built missiles designed to destroy U.S. bases in Japan and Guam, then developed long-range radar in order to spot approaching U.S. aircraft as early as possible. They also designed ways to weaken communication between U.S. planes. In addition, the Chinese fine-tuned their nuclear arsenal and built many different types of carrier-killer missiles designed to take down U.S. naval power. Washington and Silicon Valley. The huge gap between technology and the military in the United States is due to the failed relationship between Washington and the capital of technology, California's Silicon Valley. After World War II, Dwight D. Eisenhower, Chief of Staff of the Army, call for the integration of civilians in technology fields into the military. The United States was feeling threatened by the technological advances of the Soviet Union. As president, Eisenhower assigned Bernard Shriver, a one-star general, to develop nuclear weapons that could hit targets on the other side of the planet. He worked out of California to create an innovative military-industrial partnership, and in just 5 years, Shriver and his team achieved their task. However, as the Cold War wound down, Congress started thinking more about saving money than making military innovations. Information revolution. Today, few tech companies are willing to work in national defense. One of them is NVIDIA, which created a graphics processing unit designed for video games. The same tool helped Oak Ridge National Laboratory build its supercomputer, which can perform 200 quadrillion operations per second. Technology can tremendously advance military abilities. Self-driving vehicles are one example. Another is a supercomputer that could create a secure and effective battle network that would be groundbreaking. The information revolution has made it possible to integrate advanced sensors into every American home. Yet service members are still standing guard instead of being replaced by this type of sensors. While every mobile app gets updated multiple times a month, that is not true for the military. Software is still disregarded in the U.S. military. Artificial intelligence, which has become reliable due to the huge amount of data and computing power available, is still not present in the military. Google's AlphaStar, which mastered the strategy game StarCraft II through machine learning its war strategies, can now beat any professional human player. The integration of something similar in the Department of Defense may be essential for the future. The information revolution reached space through high-tech companies such as SpaceX, rather than the military. These companies also are tackling the challenge of quantum science. Quantum computers and sensors could radically change war, but none of this technology has touched military areas. Washington continues to reject these advances. Change outside of war. The main reason the United States is behind on national defense is not simply because of lack of money, or lack of technology, or lack of attention. There is no one answer to why we haven't advanced at all in the last couple of decades. However, it is not irrational to question whether military advances and reform are even possible outside of war. The military is not like any other institution in terms of performance feedback. Without a war, there is no way to know for sure how a military program will perform. This is why there is no apparent need for change in the way the military operates. However, change in the absence of war is possible. One example is the development of the Assault Breaker, an intelligence-gathering aircraft, in the 1970s by Harold Brown, a Secretary of Defense. In order for this type of change to be successful, both civilian and military leaders must have their goals aligned. It is never about just technology or just military. Moreover, change requires real-world experimentation. High-tech arms race. In 2014, more than 80 governments started meeting to take action against developing and using lethal autonomous weapons. These weapons, once activated, cannot be stopped by a human before hitting the target. An international ban is in the works. While China agreed on banning the use of these weapons, it did not necessarily agree on banning their development. To this day, it is not known how far the Chinese government has taken military technological reform. A lot of their high-tech weapons could be lethal autonomous ones. Since China's intentions are not clear, there may be a high-tech arms race going on. China sees the United States as the strongest form of Western liberalism, the enemy, and will do anything to exert power over it. The United States is well behind China in this race. For example, hypersonic weapons are fast and unpredictable, making them extremely difficult to disarm or take down. China has already launched multiple flight tests of these weapons. Meanwhile, in the United States, the development of these high-speed weapons is still in its first stages. Another disadvantage the United States may face is in biotechnology. It is possible to enhance human performance through intelligent machines, but the United States may be unlikely to cross this ethical line. However, China might, and probably will. Realistically, it is unlikely that the United States will be able to win this race. What it can do, however, is catch up and be technologically equal to China. Humans and machines. With the rise of machine learning and artificial intelligence, ethical questions need to be asked. It seems like the focus on intelligent war machines will feed the wrong objectives. The goal in any war should be to minimize the number of innocents harmed, but with intelligent machines in control, that may be difficult to do. The integration of artificial intelligence into war is not simply human-machine teaming. It is rather a relationship of human command and machine control. Essentially, autonomy is already present in the military. Commanders give their soldiers autonomy to a certain degree. Training, testing, and trust are involved in the process. Subordinates are only granted autonomy after trust is established. Accountability plays a huge role in this relationship. It also does in the case of machines, as their developers and testers will be held accountable for any failures. There will always be certain rules, limits, and conditions to this autonomy. The goal is not to build perfect machines, but simply to build machines that can perform tasks better than humans. There should not be a need to use lethal autonomous weapons, but not having them while China does could be disastrous. A military Internet of Things. A team in the Air Force Research Laboratory in Dayton developed two low-cost unmanned weapons, the Valkyrie and the Orca. The Valkyrie is an extremely fast aircraft with sensors and weapons. The Orca is an underwater vehicle. Artificial intelligence could easily be integrated in these machines at a relatively low cost. Their potential doesn't end at limited autonomy. Once intelligent machines have become the norm, we can start building our battle network around them. Strong battle networks are essential to closing the kill chain. It is a highly complex task, but it is essentially built around the ability to share information. The current U.S. military is behind on that. A lot of money and time has been invested in sensing and shooting processes, but barely any attention is given to the information sharing aspect of battle networks. It is humans' responsibility to figure a way out of the lack of information sharing during battle. An effective battle network should look like a military Internet of Things. All sensors of all machines should be able to share information with every shooter of every machine. However, this would not mean that machines would have complete control over the kill chain. Humans would still have an enormous role in this process. They would just be doing more useful things, like controlling the core decisions, instead of wasting time deciphering bad information sharing. In addition, fewer military personnel would be needed. A military Internet of Things essentially means that lower-ranking personnel would take commands from machines controlled by higher-ranking personnel. Eventually, humans would only need to focus on closing the best kill chains possible, as fast as possible. Moving, shooting, and communication. There are three elements to warfare: movement, shooting, and communication. These will all have to change according to where technology leads the military. The United States has long assumed that in case of war, it will have a lot of time to move combat power around the planet. With China's recent advancements, however, combat power and movement could be obliterated before even reaching its destination. It will be extremely difficult to hide from sensors and satellite surveillance, so it is necessary to figure out workarounds. Hiding could be ignored, and we could bombard the enemy with a huge number of combat forces and weapons. This could be achieved by using machines such as the Valkyrie and Orca, which are extremely low budget and could be manufactured and launched in mass numbers. As for shooting, non-kinetic firing and electronic warfare are going to become more important. These will allow for a larger range of fire, as well as higher precision. Firing will become faster through 3D printing, which can be used to manufacture weapons in locations close to battle. Lastly, communications will continue to tie everything together. The ideal scenario would be to receive information smoothly that will allow for faster closing kill chains, while simultaneously destroying the enemy's ability to receive information. Communication networks must be built so that they can be repaired quickly after a cyber attack. The decentralization of communications will be essential, as it will provide more security. At the rate new technologies are developing, this does not seem far-fetched. The focus on defense. In October 2017, John McCain wrote a letter to the Secretary of Defense proposing a new national defense strategy. McCain firmly believed that if the United States kept spending money on more of the same, we would lose a war in a matter of hours. It may be impossible for the United States to return to being dominant over China, but we can stop China from dominating us. This goal should be a priority, which means that we may have to make compromises in order to achieve it. The new strategy needs to be fundamentally more defensive. American wars abroad have always been highly offensive, violent, and barely defensive. The opposite needs to happen. This means that we need to work on not letting China seize control of any U.S. territory. Defense mechanisms must all be ready in any place that war might occur. Slow-paced wars are a thing of the past, and it is more likely that wars will look like Russia's attack on Ukraine in 2014. Decentralization of the military is going to be key, forcing an enemy to attack numerous small bases instead of a couple big ones. We should also focus on developing machines and systems that are easily replaced and expanded. Essentially, a deeper investment in software must be made, as relying on hardware will always be highly risky in the wars of the future. Bureaucracy. An obstacle to change in the past, and that we need to take care of today, is the power of bureaucracy. In passing a military budget, there are two steps: the requirements process and the acquisition process. In the requirements process, the Department of Defense studies the validity of buying a certain machine. This can take years, leaving troops with antiquated machinery. Moreover, the people in charge may simply decline new technology in favor of older, functional machines. It is obvious that there are a lot of problems with our current budget process, and Congress has a history of limiting budgets for the military's new technologies. Moreover, the very structure of decision-making in the Department of Defense is flawed. The Army and the Navy almost never cooperate on decisions, which is highly destructive. The leaders in the Pentagon capable of changing the budget are consumed with the present, not the future. Motivation for change. The problem with Washington is that it has prioritized legacy over technology. Faster kill chains cannot be closed using our usual weapons and ways of fighting. This is why Washington's incentives need to change. The Department of Defense and Congress need to work together. An uncomfortable degree of transparency must be established between the two. They both need to work on defining exactly and in detail what the future needs and what the next steps should look like. Vague ideas do not lead anywhere. One way to change incentive and heighten motivation is through competition. Contests could be held to come up with the best solutions to the military's most important problems. Money could be included in on the budget to pay for the competitions. Tech companies, military services, and government laboratories could all work for a better military future. U.S. defense leaders need to start truly believing in and investing in a high-tech future. This would also potentially fix the broken relationship between Washington and Silicon Valley, and they could start working together again for a strong future. None of this is going to be a short, easy, or cheap process. A lot of money, work, and years must go into the future of U.S. defense. But things can get better. We do not lack money or technology. All we lack is incentive and a little imagination. Author style. Christian Brose writes with a formal tone, but he does not come off as overly scholarly and explains most military terms. He can be a bit repetitive. A bibliography and references are provided at the end of the book. Author's perspective. Christian Brose is the Chief Strategy Officer of Anduril Industries, a defense technology company. He was Staff Director of the Senate Armed Services Committee from 2014 until 2018. He is clearly knowledgeable about military systems, but seems to assume the worst when it comes to America's enemies. He doesn't provide much proof of China's apparent technological and military dominance. He also may overstate the extent to which the U.S. has applied ethical considerations to its military actions. With the speed of current events, some of his theories may already need updating.